you're getting like ground floor and then
so I'm living on more journalist style salary more than salary. Yeah, exactly.
I know so many people who go to that corporate law route. That's how we
Very exciting speakers on a really juicy topic, from coding to stories. And before we get the evening started, I just wanted to tell you all a little bit about, let's see, is this working here?
No.
No? Okay. We're just supposed to advance the slideshow. Media and technology experts that are focused on the new evolution of technology. We actually are interested in how the technology is finally catching up with the theories around the medium is the message. And so we put together this panel tonight that I'll tell you all about in just 1 second. And actually, the little graphic there just showed a little bit about what transmedia is. It's putting the storyteller and the audience inside the technology and vice versa. So I'd like to as we get started here, are we able to move this forward now? There we go. I'd like to thank some of our sponsors and media sponsors, Job on TV, the Producers Guild of America, and Parasoma. And I would especially like to thank our sponsor, SwissNex, for letting us have this event in this beautiful space here tonight. And I'm going to turn it over to Andrea Mueller, who is going to tell you a little bit about SwissNex.
Thank you. Hello. So my name is Andrea, and I'm part of the event team here at SwissNex, and I also work with the university relations team. On behalf of SwissNex, I'm happy to welcome you here tonight in our event space for this meetup. SwissNex is an initiative of the State Secretariat for Education and Research, connecting the dots between Switzerland and the United States in the fields of science, education, art, and innovation. Apart from organizing interdisciplinary events as this one, we also help universities, Swiss universities, to develop specific projects and partnerships here in the area. And we also host significant Swiss startups in our offices to help them enter the US market. Tonight, we would especially want to thank our speakers, David Austin, Geoff McGee, and Michael Chang for being here, as well as Transmedia SF for this opportunity to organize this event. New forms of storytelling rise more and more attention nowadays, and we are happy to spread the word to our audience. If you want to learn more about SwissNex San Francisco, you can visit our website, www.swissnexsanfrancisco.org, or come meet us after the event. And I wanted also to mention that we are going to post a blog post very soon on Transmedia on our Next Trends blog. And the address is www.nexttrends.swissnexsanfrancisco.org. Thank you.
Thank you. I have to say, it is such a pleasure to be doing an event with SwissNex. These folks are helping us to raise the bar on what a meetup is. How many people have been to a meetup and somebody throws out boxes of pizza? Right? And these folks helped us to put out wine in real wine glasses. So we gotta love working with SwissNex. They are our favorite sponsor, or one of our favorite sponsors. We love all of our sponsors. But the story is what we're here to talk about tonight. And this is a really very exciting event for us. We are talking about, from coding to storytelling, the medium to the message. And as I said earlier, we're looking at how the technology is beginning to catch up with some of the theories that we've been developing over the years. Our organizer for tonight's event is our own Alice Gillette. Alice is a radio journalist and one of our core members of the Transmedia SF team, and she's done an incredible job of organizing this event and bringing together these speakers. So I'm going to turn it over to Alice to get the party started.
All right, hi everybody. I'm really happy to see you all here. Lots of friends in the audience, it's great. As Beth was telling, Transmedia SF is all about storytelling and exploring innovative forms of storytelling. And in storytelling, in Transmedia storytelling, there's the story, and then there's the content, and there's also the technology. And we have been talking a lot about the content and how the story is always king. And now today, we really wanted to talk about the technology that's behind those stories. Especially on the web, digital forms of storytelling, you can't really do a story if you don't know how to code and if you can't, power those stories with good, technology platforms. So we really wanted to take a look at this tonight and kind of, talk about this. If the story's king, the code is queen. So we're going to question this assessment tonight with our great speakers. So the way the evening is gonna work is that we're first gonna have our speakers give a little presentation, and then we're also gonna have a panel discussion. And you are welcome to ask questions at any time of this. And so we will have tonight David Austin, Senior Director at the Media Camp of Turner Broadcasting. Hello. And also Jeff McGee, Creative Director for Media and Communications.
I thought we were starting.
Sorry, yeah, you can stay here with me. So Jeff McGee, Creative Director for Media and Communications at the Bill Lane Center for the American West at Stanford University. And then Michael Chang, Creative Technologist at the Data Art team of Google Creative Lab. So they will all stick around after the panel, and you'll be able to ask them questions about what they do. So, David, I think it's your turn. Yeah.
Now I'll get it.
David.
Pardon me for a moment. We all decided to go with our own computers because nobody trusts anybody else. Because we all have different technology. And the feedback is not me. It's the mic. Let's give it a second to find itself. Hey, it worked. Great. Hi, everybody. My name is David Austin. I couldn't guess that one. I'm here to talk a little bit about what I think when I think about technology and I think about media. I'm relatively new to the whole media space. I actually worked at Apple for a long time, 17 years, and then I went and did a bunch of investing, and then I started working at Turner Broadcasting about a year ago. So I've been a year into actual media. I really worked for a technology company that became a media company. Now I'm working for a media company who thinks it wants to become a technology company. I'm trying to help that happen with some disruption. So let me talk a little bit about things. So from coding to stories, when I thought about this, I thought, well, it's not really about from coding to stories to me. What's really important is technology to stories. Because it's not just coding. To me, coding is just yet another technology that is affecting storytelling and what's going on. To me, it all goes back to the very, very beginning. We had our first initial technology we created as humans, which is talking, language. And we were able to then create stories and have people tell stories. It was really a one-to-one or a one to a small group, and then it would just go through it on and on. That's where storytelling came from originally. So I think, to me, I keep on going back to think about technologies. It's just nothing really changes. It's just the tools change, okay? So, and the things haven't changed. What maintained a story over time was it captivating? Was it interesting? Did it resonate with the listener as well as the person telling the story? All that's really, really important. And again, language that goes back, you know, a couple years. Thank you, Swiss Next, for giving us the glasses. Obviously, next came, again, I put these in my own order. You can decide if you have other technology you think are more or less important. But to me, writing is what came up next. It was just a huge change. We took this spoken language and we added the fact, the ability to actually be able to put it down and have it in a form that could be repeated. You could either, you know, start on cave walls, depending upon if you believe that or not. I'll let you guys figure that one out. But the fact that actually people could tell either with pictorials and then also writing with language, and actually being able to actually, on parchment and other things, be able to actually propagate, so not just one-to-one or one to a few, but that could propagate to many, 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 right? Which became, you lost the telephone tag problem, right? And you didn't know that just the story being repeated over and over. It became the fact that it could be repeated, you know, consistently, which is a huge change. Obviously, like the first book was like in what, 868 AD, I see by my notes, thank goodness for notes. And from there, it continued. Obviously, then you had plays and theater, again, storytelling, all these different technologies. You think of the theater, they decided with stages and how to set them in the round that are different. All these are technologies that were created by humans to be able to advance storytelling. 15th century, Gutenberg, amazing thing, came up with this mass printing ability. Again, it allowed us to get those books and those things propagated to a much larger audience. It changed, I think, dramatically the storytelling that occurred. And it was, again, a huge technology. The same thing happens now with as technologies come up. It's like, this was just as big of a technology change then as it is now. Then we got into some very interesting things. Before that was always print, and it was like you had to know how to read. Then suddenly, there's this thing called a gramophone, and there's this thing called, what do you call it? What camera? You call it a camera, and you have a camera, and all of a sudden now, you don't need to learn how to read to be able to enjoy a story. You can have it played back to you. That was a huge change. That caused the masses of people who could now enjoy a story much beyond what it was before. And that really became, I think, this is where we really got into mass media. Before that, it was always, the masses were always people that were able to read, which was always a subset of the population. So really, again, the 19th century is when that changed. The next huge change, I don't do this, 1902, you could actually go to a theater and watch a movie. We had all this together. You had both words, because we put words up on the screen, but also had visual, it had audio, it had all these things all told consistently to the same population over and over again. A major technology change. It caused huge, they had people getting upset at the fact that they didn't want their kids to go to these things because they thought they were, scary, because they didn't want their kids to actually learn something. But that's the thought. People are always scared of technology. It's a new thing, and it takes generations for that to change. And you see that happening now. Radios, 1930s, same thing. The big difference here is I don't need to go to a theater anymore. I can be in my home and enjoy a story. It's an amazing transition. It suddenly became, as part of that was the fact that actually it's broadcast, this whole concept that can go from one place to multiple. Again, I maybe say all these things, you all know all this. Anyway, I thought it was interesting when I was looking into it. And then television in the 50s, which of course is near and dear to my heart, mainly because I like watching TV, but also because it's part of what I do. What became really interesting with same thing with television is everybody said, a lot of people said they didn't want their kids to watch television, that it warped their minds. Well, we are all now warped minds. But that's just the way the society has gone. If the culture has decided this is a perfectly fine way to do storytelling. And again, it's broadcast. You can have, the difference here that was kind of interesting is television started actually constricting things again. Prior to this, anybody could do a book. You can print a book, you can go someplace and get it printed and propagate it out. It always got limited. Some things television was limiting, again, a small set of broadcasters controlled the airwaves when it's broadcast digital. So that changed. So this is another one I think is actually a very interesting technology that changed storytelling, which is video games. First video games in the early 80s. I didn't have one of these, but I had a very similar old little Pong. But again, there was actually storytelling going on. There's an amazing amount of storytelling in video games. A lot of people don't realize that, don't appreciate it, but I think it's changed the mindset of what it really means to do tell stories. I love when I found this picture. So this is the original World Wide Web. Obviously that was a huge impact on storytelling, mainly because it changed who controlled the media again. instead of just being broadcast to a small set of people who control what you get to see and look at, suddenly anybody can be a publisher. Everybody, everywhere, as long as you have an internet connection. Again, that was still limited for quite a while. But what changed it again in a huge way, again, this was the early 1990s. Thank you, Tim Berners-Lee. The next thing that I think became the next huge thing that's going on now is mobile. Both mobile on phones, mobile on iPads, mobile on everything that I can be wirelessly anywhere. We all see it. You walk under the bus. Who's actually looking outside at their window? They're all looking at their phones. And they're seeing everything. They're able to see the full web, they're able to do be able to actually enjoy. People are watching movies constantly. Television shows, you see it all the time. I think it's dramatically changed the way storytelling is. The other thing that's really interesting here is it's become, again, well, I won't get to that quite yet. So what's next? Technology. What technology is going to happen next? I have no idea. Is it going to be this? Is it going to be an immersive visual thing where you basically see your own thing? Or is it going to be more like this, where suddenly it's actually embedded inside of our bodies? Right now, the closest we have is this, which is slightly scary too. But it's happening, right? The science fiction stuff is actually happening, and the storytelling is changing. What you see, how you consume the media is changing, how the media is produced. This can be different. You have to produce media in a different way to be able to be perceived in this world. So, all that being said, what's changed? By the way, in case it wasn't clear, this is all just my opinion, and it could be full of bumps, so take it for its worth. I think a big change that's happening is the democratization of content creation. When I was at Apple, one of the things I worked on a lot was a lot of content creation applications. So things like Keynote, I worked on that. Things like iMovie, iDVD, all these kinds where suddenly people who didn't have to spend hundreds of thousands of dollars to be able to do things like create a movie or create a DVD or create an interesting presentation because you didn't have to do lots of things, you suddenly can do it at a much cheaper price. That democratization is amazing. That's causing the masses, again, to have the ability to actually control the story that can be told. So I think that's one big change. We also have a democratization of content distribution. It used to be, again, you had to go through a set of distributors, like a Turner Broadcasting, going on. Again, for a certain level of kind of content, that's required. But as we all know, YouTube is a huge, amazing distributor of content, or Vimeo, or any other video distributors, or podcasts. All these things are happening now. So it's a democratization. It's a broad audience. We all can now be both creators of content and distributors of content. We don't need to ask anybody's permission, which I think is a huge change. And there's a whole democratization happening of funding. Just beginning, things, as we've seen in Kickstarter and others, where something you can get funded like you couldn't ever before. It used to be only you had to go down to Silicon Valley, right? You had to go down and try to get money. And that was very, very hard, and only a small number of people could do it. And or you go to Hollywood, and you pitch your deep idea, and it's the same hits business, you know. They do 100, 1 out of 100 hit, make a hit, but there's hundreds of thousands who'd like to be able to do something. That's actually possible nowadays. So what does it mean to you and me and everybody else? I think there's never been a better time to create a story than today. It's never been easier to create multimedia content. It's never been this easy to distribute your creation you create. And it's never been this easy to raise funding. But great storytelling is still extremely hard work. Okay, so realize it's never been easier, that doesn't mean it's easy. It's just never been easier. So now it's much easier, and I think it's going to continue to get easier, but right now it's pretty darn easy. The thing that's not changed is narrative's not changed. You need plots, you need characters, you need a point of view. The story, the content is critical because you can do this, all these things, you can distribute to everywhere, but again, it could be maybe a one-to-one or a one-to-a-few. To actually affect many, you have to have a good story. So again, all this technology is worth nothing if people don't create amazing things. So to me, that's the most important thing. I'm going to do a little side, tell you a little about what Media Camp is, and then going back to a little close. So Media Camp is an initiative we started at Turner Broadcasting. Started a little bit before I started. The idea was to do something, but it wasn't really clear what. But I was the first hire in San Francisco here, and I said, hey, that looks like fun, because basically the idea is, how can we, Turner, play in the startup space and do it in a positive way? So we coined this idea of Media Camp, which is an accelerator program. So people say, what's an accelerator? Because you may not know what an accelerator is. there's different kinds of accelerators. There's technology accelerators. They're all around groups of people coming together to help startups create products. There's a bunch of technology ones you probably have heard of, Y Combinator, 500 Startups, Techstars. There's cloud ones, there's packaged goods, there's an advertising one in Portland called Pi, which is really great. They focus on advertising. What we've seen also, those are kind of more broad, right? It goes a very broad accelerator. We've seen some, what we call verticalization, I love these terms, but basically hitting healthcare only. There's a bunch of accelerators in that space. And so we look at MediaCamp as the first media-focused accelerator. We aren't looking at technology that just does anything, right? We're looking at technologies that directly affect and disrupt the media business. We just finished our first accelerator class about a week and a half ago. We had our demo day here. So I love this venue, it's very comfortable. We had 6 companies that graduated: Shoot, Matcha, Showbuck, Social Samba, and SwitchCam. Lots of S's. We tried to get 6, but we only got. So we say Shoot's sort of an S, and we call it Matcha Smatcha every now and then. I'm going to highlight 3 of these, but they all have an aspect of storytelling in them. They all have an aspect of social in them, which I think is a critical aspect. I didn't even mention that the technology that's affecting. I think social is sort of just a technology that's kind of a broad swath. It's just inherent in everything nowadays in the technology space. But I want to talk about 3 of them real quick, just to kind of give you a background on the kind of companies we work with. What the accelerator does is we put like 20K into each company and we spend 12 weeks with them intensely. I call it the intense dating period. And then we go on to long-term relationships. We still keep on working with them, but during the intense dating time, we do workshops, we do dinners with them. We spend a lot of time with them, and then we have a big demo day, which we had a couple weeks ago, as I mentioned. Shoot's one of the companies that was working with us. What they provide is a software platform, all in the cloud, that basically can host all your photos or videos for you. So you don't have to build all that technology yourself, you can just leverage it. We actually leveraged it at CNN. At both the Democratic convention and the Republican convention, there was a page on CNN that had all the photos that were being created. It was decided by them that all these photos are actually by CNN talent. So people who worked at CNN took the pictures and posted. But the technology is independent of that. It could be, excuse me, it could be contents curated like this, or it could just be user-generated photos. Very similar. If you see up on the wall over there, there's what's called a slide shoot for this event. All you do is do a Twitter. You do a Twitter to coding stories, and it'll just show up there. So you take a picture. It's a way of curating. It's a way of telling a story in a pictorial way. They also support video. I mean, really great company. Really good for brands. Next company you probably heard of, and I'm gonna go get my water real quick. I'm getting froggy. This company called Social Samba. I think they've been here before, or yeah, I think Garrett's had. So Social Samba was involved with us for 12 weeks. They did some great stuff that you probably have heard of them. They did something called #Killer site. They were Emmy nominated. I don't know if they won. I don't think they won last week, unfortunately. They should have. I voted for them. But the thing that's really interesting, been working really tightly with us, is they actually are. We're actually doing a Falling Skies, which again is a TNT show, so again, working with brands. And, I'm hoping everybody's relatively familiar with Social Samba. If you're not, what it really lets you do is it lets you actually have a social interaction with characters from your favorite TV show, movie, book, whatever you want, and you can actually interact with them. They're doing this both on the web as well as mobile, which is stupendous. The really great thing that they're doing for Falling Skies, they just announced that they were doing this a couple weeks ago at our demo day. It hasn't actually gone live yet, but it will soon. The really great thing is they're actually opening up, and one thing we're doing at Turnaround, which I think is great that we're actually open to this, is we're actually up to where you can actually go in and write your own story using the characters out of Falling Skies. So you as anybody can go in and write your own story using the characters out of Falling Skies, and it basically is a choose your own adventure in that world. So I think that's, again, it's taking, large old media, and by old I don't mean me, I mean Turner, and be able to actually let people create stories out of that, which I think is really, really fun. So we're trying to change the way things work a little bit. So that's Social Samba. The third one I want to kind of mention is SwitchCam. SwitchCam is one of the other companies that was in our cohort, as the phrase is, for a group of our 6 companies that we had. They're really all about allowing you to have anybody to be you're a camera crew. You can set up an event and say, hey, go take video of this. Everybody does video of it, and then it allows you to actually play it back. Really interesting is where you can have in multiple angles. So you can be playing back at a wedding and be able to switch between one angle to another for different views, simultaneously all at the same time frame. Or it could be a concert where you're going back and forth. And you can go from the back row to the front row. Or it could be a skate park, and you can go from different views, both professional or end-user content. That's the idea. We're actually looking at doing a lot of these things like this with Turner properties as well, again with both user-generated videos as well as with our professional video. But I think it's really changing the way stories can be told, both in on the visual side, in the written side on Social Samba, the video side on. That's what Media Camp is trying to help change, and change how a media company thinks about working with a large population versus just doing only our small little group of we do everything and we don't talk to anybody else. So we're trying to change it with Media Camp. So I just want to say, I think you should all go forth and create because we can use your content. And that's all I have. Thank you.
So, very glad to be here. I'm going to take things in a little different direction now as soon as my, keynote. So you know a lot about keynote.
Yeah, is it?
No, I think keynote is fine. It's just the place or not.
It's that retina, it's retina.
Oh yeah, no, yeah, I am retina, but only me.
I'd recommend closing it and opening it back up.
Oh, when it's plugged in, yeah.
Sometimes it, yeah, and dancing.
Wait for it. I don't know if I waited long enough. Oh, I think I'm there. Oh wait, I know. I think I know. Is it coming up now? Oh, shit. Getting something. Well, that's a different.
It worked before.
It's better be good.
Oh, wait. Something? Update later.
I don't know where to click.
I think it's just switching.
I think that's them right now.
Yeah. They're switching backwards. See if it works.
This is Transmedia. It's we have it on, Alice, you have it on your machine, right? The PDF? Should we mix up the order? Maybe Michael can go now. Is it not on there?
And the answer is none because it works all by itself. No, but so Michael Chang, Alice, did you want to? Michael Chang from the Google Creative Lab is actually going to step in.
I'll step in.
It's so good that we had you as a pinch hitter here.
Who knows what a shibboleth is? S-H-I, you guys know. What's a good example of a shibboleth?
The word shibboleth.
Ah. How about Lollapalooza? Do you guys know what the etymology of that, cultural history of that word? It, in the Pacific theater of World War II, this can get really dark. How Allied soldiers identify Japanese troops is to ask them to say the word Lollapalooza, because the Japanese native speakers have a really hard time speaking it, and so if they find it's a Japanese troop, they'll shoot them on sight. Where is my mouth? There you are. I have another shibboleth, and let's go to slide 0. So the program I count from 0, and we can go play slideshow. Cool. Oh, this works. Except no, I don't want that. I don't want my speaker notes. Let me fix that 1 second. Excuse me. Okay, cool. And then let's try that again. Nope, no speaker notes. Alright, I'm doing my best. That's annoying. Oh, how about this? I can do this. There's my speaker notes. And I'm going to try my best to pan around. So, my talk is called Around a Candlelit Orrery. Orrery is just another shibboleth because I have a hard time speaking and saying this word. And who knows what an orrery is, actually?
High presenter notes.
High presenter notes.
Thank you. I'm embarrassing. And you can't read my presenter notes. That'd be really embarrassing. An orrery. All right, it's this thing, right? These are mechanical devices that illustrate the position and motion and moons of things going in the solar system around generally around the heliocentric model, which just means things are going around the sun. The earliest of which is the Antikythera machine. This is found in the 1900s in the bottom of the ocean, and historians and scientists have a hard time figuring out what this was for. And I think the latest theory is that this was actually an orrery, a very, very ancient one, dated to be around 1 BC, made by the Greeks. Really, really fascinating stuff. People have been making orreries for a very long time. This painting, lovely painting by British painter Joseph Wright in the 1700s. The title of the painting is called A Philosopher Lecturing on the Orrery. In the middle is the orrery, and around are children listening and learning about the solar system as if it's a story time at a campfire. The painting is culturally and historically significant because it replaced classical subjects in a painting with one of a scientific nature. In the shadows that are cast by this painting is by a lamp placed in the middle of the orrery to represent where the sun is giving light. It really gives this dramatic look to it. It's an essential part of the display, but for no other reason than to heighten the drama of the philosopher's lesson. And one tiny little bit I love about this painting is that the phases of the moon here, Joseph Wright being very clever, is represented as the faces of every adult here in this painting. He's very, very clever. I really empathize with Joseph Wright, especially with the subjects of this painting. First point I want to make is that under the right setting and atmosphere and mood lighting and what have you, the study of just about any subject can be made interesting. The second point I want to make is that the object itself, the orrery, is a machine designed to model the understanding of some aspect of the world, but transcending that of a star chart or a map you can find in the book. Its intentions are to bring to fore the reality of what's in the books and in the mental models of the astronomer's head. But that the heavenly bodies moving around the sun isn't just an idea, it's actually a real thing. And by presenting it as a model, as something that's in front of you, that you can rotate around, it suddenly becomes real, as opposed to just reading about it. And this is going to be the topic of my talk. So let's travel to the 21st century with our satellites and our internet and our fancy mapping technology that Apple has given us. On my journey to map, model, and understand the world with the latest and greatest minds and technologies, I ended up at Google's data arts team. And today I want to show you a programmatic orrery of sorts. Google held a conference in July which focused on using information technology to expose illicit networks around the world, such as the social graph of drug cartels and criminal organizations. I was introduced to this Dr. Robert Mugabe. His name is down here. And he works with PRIO, P-R-I-O, which is the Peace Research Institute of Oslo. And he's an expert on small arms weapons trade around the world. And we got together and tried to figure out what we can do for this conference. And we needed something flashy, and we wanted to wow people, and also to bring to fore a lot of these problems that Google is dealing with this conference. So we have this data set that looks something like this. And this is a data set that contains trades between countries for weapons over the course of 12 years, from 1998 to 2010. It lists the exporter of the country of origin for weapons trading, the importer, the year, and as well as a weapons code, which the UN has these like categorizations for weapons, and a lot of these are like military-grade assault rifles, civilian handguns, sporting rifles, and so on. So I know that there is a story in this data. It's touching countless of lives, and I also know that there's already a mental model in Robert Mugabe's head. How do we make that real? So I start by mapping each country into a latitude and longitude. Any position around the world in the globe can be represented by a latitude and longitude. And map the data of every single trade onto a sphere and draw lines to illustrate which each trade is going by every country. Now keep in mind that I'm doing all of this in WebGL, which is just a fancy way of saying accelerated graphics on the web. This is a relatively new thing. It allows us high performance graphics. You don't have to download anything. You can just go to a URL and look at it in your web browser. It's really fancy, really nice. So long as you're using Chrome or Firefox. So here are some failed attempts at essentially trying to give the data a haircut, quite almost literally. I was trying to create form and also try to ignore what's actually there, but actually try to see the data first. Now I'll get into the detail about this, but I'll just show you some pretty pictures first. And some more failed attempts. I ended up with something akin to this. I settled on an overall way of representing the connected countries. And I started working on cleaning up the readability of this data visualization. So early on, every country here is represented by a different random color. And every line has those colors. It's sort of hard to see in this image. And this actually created a lot of visual noise and reduced visibility, readability. So that's something I want to immediately address. The next, I started adding these particles that fly around. They go down the length of these lines, and they give you a direction for the trade. Right? It's like, okay, so this particles are coming out of here, and it's going to that country, so it must be going. These are the trades. These are the exports from that country to the imports to that country. And I replaced the geometric representation of these countries. Originally, it had this like fancy hexagon thing to something a little bit clearer with political borders. And eventually, I want to add text labels and stuff so I can see like what country is what, because not everybody is good at geography. I'm awful at geography. I come from North America. The really tricky part about this was figuring out how to communicate the categories of weapons trade, civilian, military, and sporting, that the UN had categorized. We eventually rolled up all the sporting weapons into civilian category, and to just further simplify things down. Here's an early version which the screen represent civilian weapons. On top of that, military weapons in red, and on top of that, ammunition in blue. This gets really, really confusing because the colors start blending together, and they started creating colors that are out of context of this visualization. You start getting pinks and purples and who knows what else, and they don't really mean anything anymore. So that's not good. I'm going to do away with that. Eventually, we just settled. I think this is probably my proudest part of my career, is just to cut it out, just simplify it down, and make just exports blue, and then exports red, and then imports blue. There we go. So it eventually looked something like this. The United States importing weapons from Spain. This visualization. And so here's a couple more images. This one's still from the multicolored, the tricolored one, different categories. Eventually ended up looking at something like this. Okay, so I want to take a second to refer back to this painting and remind ourselves that I spent all this time making it look visually appealing. For the same reason that the philosopher lecturing on the orrery lit a candle to create a dramatic effect. That this data sitting somewhere in a spreadsheet is no more consumable than star charts in a book. Again, I want to make this real to people. And in this case, Robert is the philosopher, and I am the orrery maker. Here's what the final piece looked like. I'm going to refresh this because it's all messed up now. Anticipation. Important part of storytelling. It's still a little bit messed up. That's okay. The screen is too small. All right. I'm not even going to full screen this. You can drag it over. Yeah, this is really messed up on the screen. I'm sorry, but you can go to this website eventually, and you can look at it in your own leisure. I want to talk about some examples that Robert Ruga verified with us in his visualization, told in orrery form. Okay. So, Sudan and Iran report a $15 million transaction of military weapons in 2003. Let's go look at 2003. It's right here, and Sudan, I think it's this country here. Okay, so there's Iran. In the genocide in Sudan is said to have kicked off that year. Let's take a look at the graph for this. Oh, man, this is hard. Bam. 71,000% increase. And the death toll dropping spectacularly the few years after. Let's look at Iraq, which had a trade embargo from 2002 and earlier, and lifted later when coalition forces in NATO took over. Let's look for, let's just search here. Let's Google without search, right? And no, that's not word. That's not country. There. Importing weapons from 2000, etc. on. Guatemala is one of the most dangerous countries in the world, and has the highest gun homicide rate on the planet. Let's go look at Guatemala. Oh, this is totally blocking the view. All right. It has a 700% increase in imports since the end of the Civil War, since 1996. Today, criminal violence claims more lives in this country than at the height of the Civil War. I'll skip ahead to Russia. Let's take a look at Russia. That's not Russia. Ruskies are not there. Okay, Russian Federation. I'm going to zoom out. This stupid chart is blocking everything. Okay, whatever. Perhaps one of the most staggering increases in official arms trade since the end of the Cold War is Russia. In 1992, reported exporting less than $10 million. A lot of this is in the gray market, in off-the-record transfers. But by the end of 2010, Russia was exporting more than $142 million, which is remarkable as the sheer diversity of arms trade that it's selling all over the place. Finally, let's go to the United States, because, hey, US is always the villain here. Explosion. Yeah. So, in contrast, the United States is the world's single largest arms dealer. By volume and value, it's also the world's largest arms importer. In 2010, for example, the U.S. imported some $605 million, but exported $605 million, but imported about $1 billion in arms due to the sort of voracious domestic appetite for weapons. There you go. So, where are you labeled? Okay, it's cut off here. I want to close by saying that these numbers are often overlooked by the UN because while horrific, the dollar number pales in comparison to the amount of money spent on jets and bombs, yet the number one killer in global conflict is still small arms. I want to close this horrifying story and turn it back to a lighter note. In a sense, I've created a tool, a vehicle, for which Dr. Muga can bring his stories to the public awareness and make it real to his audience. Joseph Wright, the painter, who is acclaimed as a professional painter that expresses the spirit of the Industrial Revolution, I hope that we, as creative filmmaking, programming types, can become the creative technologists that express the spirit of the information revolution. So that's the end of my talk.
Okay, I'm the anti-climax tonight, so anyway. Oh, it's auto-playing. How about come back with my show? All right. Hi, everybody. I'm still Jeff McGee. And I just, let's give another hand to our previous speakers. I think they were just wonderful. If I could do that kind of stuff in WebGL that Michael showed us. It was a little more accessible in some ways. If we could do this, anybody can. So I'll tell you about myself a little bit. I'm the creative director for media and communications at the building Center for the American West. It's a very long title. In short, I am a journalist who is sort of embedded in an academic research center at Stanford University. Been there for just over 2 years now. Our interests are broad. We look at the past, present, and future of the western part of North America. We're interested in 3 major subject areas: economy and public policy, resources and the environment, and history and culture. So really, the past as expressed by history and culture, the present, economy and public policy, and then the future looking at climate science and habitats. And there's another layer on top of that. We're very interdisciplinary. We work with scientists and with historians, with literature scholars, and with journalists, certainly. But on top of that, there's this whole thing of data visualization and multimedia for explanation and exploration. And so that's where I come in. And so I work across these 3 sort of content verticals, if you were to call this a media company. Let me tell you a little about myself. Before that, I've spent quite a bit of time in online news. So there I was at ABC News, at the New York Times for some time, and then before I came to Stanford, I was at Le Monde in France. And here's some of my work, ranging from information graphics to sort of audio and photos, and video as well. In fact, the first thing I did out of journalism school was I ended up at ABC News. They wanted to do a product that would take their information graphics and make them accessible to kids. 8 to 12-year-olds, tweens as they call it. So the idea was that you couldn't just take an information graphic. It didn't have the entire story in it. You had all this exposition, all this basic story that came in a 700-word article, and then the information graphic sort of enhanced that. So the idea here was, well, what if we did something that was like a comic book? And this was '99, so there were a lot of people on dial-up. So a lot of this was vector illustration that was then rendered in Flash, and so it gave me a lot of control over the palettes. Bright and brighter. but also I had this idea of Brady Shepherd Ferry that you could trace images, and that meant you could use any one you wanted. So actually I had a lot of fun with this. It was sort of like this idea you could take a long story that maybe a child might be someone who's just arriving on the scene and might not have the backstory. And so it's your chance to break down a complex subject. If you break it down into enough smaller components, almost like prime factoring a large number, I think you can explain a lot of things. And I think this has informed my thinking for a long time ever since then. It's pretty monomedia in a sense. It was text and images. Soon after that, I was at the New York Times, and I think that this speaks to something I want to say about transmedia and about multimedia. That the internet is this huge database of stuff, and it gets richer and richer all the time. And in a sense, like, we need to build a user interface to match the richness that's contained within it. And we still haven't quite figured out how to contextualize all this information and turn it into stories, turn it into experiences. Not for lack of trying. So this is, sometime back, I guess about a decade ago now, that I was at the New York Times working mostly in Flash. And we had an extraordinary amount of content that, obviously could be described as reporting, but was also staff photography. We had, we were one of the few publications that still had photographers stationed all over the world in bureaus who were going out on assignment. And a lot of their stuff was just showing up in the newspapers, 1 picture or 2 pictures a day. It was really a lot of underused content there. The information graphics desk, I was the only person there to translate their graphics into online interactives. And as you can see now, what happened when they beefed up to 10, 12 people who can do online graphics. So you see how much latent talent there was there. But anyway, so another thing that was going on at this point was that people were getting more broadband. You could load sound and video, and you had this application, this authoring environment, Flash, that let you combine all these things together. And so in a sense, we're sort of where we are now, to some extent. We started looking for ways to kind of encapsulate what we were doing so we could produce stories more quickly. And in a sense, it was like we had all these different content streams. We had all the photographs that were coming in. We had information graphics. We had the reportage, which we would put it in the form of audio narration. We had video sometimes. And so what we did was almost like a mixing board. We had like these different tracks where in a particular linear sequence you could have a photo and then a graphic and then a video clip or something like that. And the idea was you were trying to basically throw the best material you had about a particular story at your audience as quickly as you could. This is an all Flash site that I built back in 2005, I guess, for a documentary film that we did in collaboration with a Canadian broadcasting company. That was sort of like the extreme moment of this database that I built to author content, and pretty much didn't go much further than that. But it was kind of interesting, the idea of like, what are the design patterns in your multimedia that you're using again and again that can help you sort of create a structure that you don't have to worry about. Can I do this thing? Yes, you can. But how do I make it? How do I really make it interesting, centered around the story? And I'm not going to go too much into these old stories right now. So then I went to Le Monde, and one of the things I noticed, other than the fact that my French was not very good, and that was a problem, or that the electoral college system is maybe a little silly. I'm trying to explain it to people in other countries. Another thing was, by the late aughts, public data was becoming really a big deal, and we were getting access to so much information. I think a lot of us who were working in information graphics had dealt with data in a much more artisanal, sort of manual way. And there was this thing called data visualization that was coming along. Like Michael's colleague, Aaron Copeland, did that animation called Flight Patterns, which was like an acid trip for me. It blew my mind. And, I realized I don't know how to do that. I need to go back to school. And I found my way to Stanford and did a fellowship there a couple years ago. And that resulted, during my time there, I interviewed a lot of people in the profession and found out what are sort of, what's their philosophy, what are they thinking about, how do you tell stories with data? I guess that's one of the open questions tonight. I guess you could find out just by going to datajournalism.stanford.edu. That's a very simplistic way to put it. But I do, if you're interested, check it out. It's an hour long, but it's broken up into chapters, and there's a podcast also. And the video format is somewhat enhanced, and I'll tell you a little bit about that later. Data visualization, not the prime topic tonight, but I want to talk a little bit about how do you tell stories with data. A lot of excitement about this possibly medium. Information, wholesale information being drawn into visual artifacts that explain things and entertain. This is Eric Rodenbeck from Stamen, who's in the video. But then there's people saying, well, you know, these visual forms, you get something out of it. It's complicated, you know, but are you really getting a narrative? You know? This is Nigel Holmes, a renowned information graphicist. Completely incomprehensible, he says. And then Jeff Hare, who's one of my instructors at Stanford, he did a project to basically survey kind of a census of information graphics in the media, and they found some interesting patterns that they turned into a paper. This is Jeff Hare and Eddie Siegel, who was a master's student at the time. And they realized that information graphics draw from a lot of other genres, including video games, as we heard before, cinema even, but also printed formats like there was one they called the science fair poster, and the example they used was of Barry Bonds' home runs. It was like this big graphic in the middle and lots of little sort of small multiples underneath it. But anyway, I'm not going to talk about this either. I'm just going to direct you to this. And in fact, the link for this is in the documentary. But what I wanted to do, before the panel starts, if this panel's ever going to start, is just some of the work I've been doing the past couple of years and what I'm trying to do with it. One is, this is a story we did, okay, so my research center, I'm a journalism resident. We have media fellowships where we bring in reporters and I work together with them to do interactive media around their story. And we do that because these stories are of interest to us. They fit into our subject area, which, as I said, was Western North America. It's pretty big, it's a big target. One of the forms that they talked about in this paper about data visualization narrative techniques is called the data slideshow. Basically, one thing after the other. So here, this is, I could try to load the interactive version of it. It's much more gracefully animated. But basically, okay, so Texas had a horrible drought last year, followed by a horrible drought for most of the US this summer. This is actually back this spring. The question was, like, should they raise water rates? What is the, you know, how does Texas compare to other places? And so here, this is a sort of a double visualization. You've got a spatial view looking at these cities, and then you've got these bar charts showing these 4 stats by city, by a selection of cities. And what we've done is we've highlighted the Texas cities, and then what you'll see, when, you know, it works better when it's animated, but basically you'll see when you go to water bill, you see most of the Texas cities sort of plunge to the bottom. And then when you look at usage, you see they start to slide upward. And when you look at average precipitation over the past 5 years, we try to be fair, you see sort of spread out. Houston actually gets a lot more rain than us, if you took the time to think about it. And then drought. Oh, I guess I didn't include that slide. Anyway, what we also have is this sort of textual narrative up here. It's basically a series of interlinked thoughts. It's a pretty conventional format, but I think that it's important when you have, you know, a bunch of different data points and you want to sort of compare them. I think it can be very helpful to just, you know, take it slow, take it easy, and really lay it out. So another thing we did here, this is a visualization of 300 years of American newspapers going back to 1690. And what we have is sort of a thumbnail history of American journalism here on the side. If I were to do it again, I'd probably give more space to the text. I don't think I realized I'd have that much to write. But you can also interact with this in a nonlinear way. You can go to any particular year in between. We have a stepper that takes you through the major eras that we're highlighting here. But you can also drill down. You can filter the newspapers by what language they're written in. It's an extraordinary number of non-English publications, particularly towards the early part of the 20th century. You know, German was almost like the main language of the U.S. Anyway, so. But the other thing you can do is you can step through this. And that's a project we did for our so-called Rural West Initiative. It's looking at sort of less reported communities. Another thing, this is sort of like basically you're looking at a database, but it's not supposed to feel like a database. You know, a lot of spatial graphics that we see now, really, they use a web map and then there's a lot of points on it. You click on the points and you get a little speech bubble and so on. What we're trying to do was do something that it didn't feel as databasey. So what we have here is basically, this is a project about the Sacramento-San Joaquin Delta. Half of California's water passes through. It's pretty messed up, and we're a long way from figuring out how to fix it. But the first thing is there was this research group that tried to imagine what it looked like in 1800 when it was pristine. And so what we have is, there's a web map underneath this that has a bunch of different layers of tile sets that show imagery of, from different times. But then we've got this sort of next and back navigation and the pagination on the bottom. And all you have to do is just sort of step through it. But at different stops, like this is an interactive graphic where you can sort of compare how it looked across 200 years apart. But then there's moments where you're basically just sort of laying type on a base map, and so it's a little like a book, but then you've got sort of top level navigation on the top. So this is the part where it's sort of taking a moment toward. And then here, like the idea was, some of the base maps were very beautiful, and so to zoom in close, let you see the texture of them and the chronological context. But then we use archival images and diaries that have been scanned from the early 1800s, and sort of it's really like paging through kind of a coffee table experience. And it ends up, it's about 22 pages long. The last screen is actually one where you can sort of do nonlinear exploration. You can turn layers on and off, kind of thing you see all the time. But it's that sort of combination of the narrative flow and also, free exploration. And one more thing I think that is sort of more in the transmedia vein is this kind of enhanced video trope that I've been exploring for some years now, starting with the documentary that I did. I think that it lets you have a more compact narrative, but you have more branching off points. Let's say you do something that's like 20 minutes long, so that it can reach a fairly broad audience. But there's some issues you really want to geek out on. We'll bring them up sort of in situ as you reach them. And what we have is a sort of a shopping cart that fills up with sidebar information. And you can pause it and read it, or interact with it as it's there, or you can follow through the entire thing and get to the end. And this is using a technology called Popcorn. It's a new JavaScript library that Mozilla Foundation is pushing. And it's true, it's very coder-oriented right now, but they're also working on something called, it keeps changing its name, I think it's WebMaker now. And there's going to be an app that comes out later this year, I think, that will enable you to basically take all sorts of webby widgets, like a Twitter feed or a Google map, a video or several videos, and sort of lay them out both on a screen, but also over time, so that as things elapse, you can have different events happen on the page. And I think that's going to be really interesting as we start to really kind of juggle all these media. So in a sense, we're finally reaching that point where, as I said before, that this vast storehouse of content, of information, is something that we can freely pull from, like a big information refrigerator, to sort of lay them out on the plate and enjoy them. So with that, let's move on to the next section. Thank you very much.
So, you want to sit down on this little stool? Yeah?
Alright, is this working? Yeah. Alright, so there's just a couple, questions that I wanted to ask you guys to go back to basics and in a little more details for some topics. First of all, Michael, when I first talked to you, you told me you call yourself a creative coder, which I never heard before. So what does this mean exactly?
Well, I mean, for a lack of a better definition, because to be honest, there's a I don't know, like I find myself, my primary activity, my day-to-day activity is coding. I'm programming something. But I'm not programming forms in, ATM code or something like that. I'm not making security things. I'm making something that's visual, that you can see, that you can play with, that you can interact with. Whether it be video games or data visualization or a film or whatever. But my medium is code. That's the only difference.
And so, do you consider yourself a storyteller? Because that's, the first thing you said is like, I saw this data set and I saw a story in it. Is it really like the way that?
I can jump back and forth between a lot of roles, which part of which is an enabler of storytelling. I don't know. I don't know myself as a very, very good storyteller. But I feel like I see myself more as like an enabler for others to tell an interesting story through some medium that they haven't really sort of gone through and toyed with.
What about you, Jeff? Do you see yourself as a storyteller?
I don't know. What do you guys think? I think that's a big part of it. Yeah, as a journalist, you're always, or as a scholar, when you're making a public-facing presentation, oftentimes you're trying to explain a particular topic. Yeah, absolutely. I think that is, I think that's intrinsic to trying to communicate. As opposed to, let's say, I think of communication as very, very recipient-centered, as opposed to expression, which is really, which I would categorize a lot of art in that range. It's expression. Like, I've got to get this off my chest. I've got to say it. And there's something very, very real about it, because I'm not trying to pander to any particular audience. It's so heartfelt. So yeah, I think I'm a storyteller. But I think that another part of interactive media or non-linear media, some of the stuff I'm doing in the academic realm is we're trying to do story finding also. These are sort of story making platforms in a sense. And that sounds a little pretentious, but what I mean is, one thing is that I didn't show was an interface we did for a project. It was another historic newspaper project, 200 years of Texas newspapers. We did natural language processing on them to see what were the different, what were the most commonly occurring words in different time periods, names, places, and organizations. And then the third kind of text processing we did was so-called topic modeling, the statistical test to see what words co-occur most frequently, and then it basically gives you baskets of like 10 or 20 words. It doesn't tell you what they mean, but when you see them together and you see like, cotton, fabric, textile, tariff, slave, you have a sense of what it's about. And so we created an interface that would let you, sort of like we were talking about with the small arms trade, where you could take a large database and sort of slice and dice it and start to make sense out of it. Is that a story? No, not yet. But it's a place where you can find patterns, and then ideally, if you can, something as simple as just being able to save the state of that interface, like if it's encoded in the URL, you can copy that and share it, and someone will see what you saw. That's great. I think the next step above that, and there is if you could actually create an annotation on the screen that other people can see. I think we're going to see more and more of that, and that's story making. It's collaborative storytelling.
And about collaboration, David, I think, for a long time there were creatives and then technologists, and it was kind of like two different things. And you guys are obviously trying to bridge those two worlds. How is this, how do you do this? Is it easy?
Yeah, it's completely easy. I don't know why they paid me for this, it's so simple. I look at myself really as a technologist. I mean, that's kind of, I'm more left brain than right brain. But I do know my most joyous moments in life have been being entirely entranced by amazing stories, both written, visual, and such. So to me, if I can help other people and with me, I try to help other companies create things that allow amazing, engrossing, enrapturing stories to be created, that's goodness. And I don't know if it's easy or hard, but you just take a step at a time and you just keep working with people.
Well, with those startups that you have, how do you make them, understand the needs of storytellers, of the industry out there? You told me about those mentors you had.
Yeah, so what we did is we found with technologists, especially, and also basically the valley, across the valley, there's a big lack of understanding of what real media companies do, and how they think, and what their value systems are. So we took as each startup we would take and we would find one, actually for the most part it was 2 or 3 mentors inside of Turner, so executives, people who are actually running brands, like somebody from CNN, somebody from Cartoon Network, somebody from TBS, and they actually we'd attach them at the hip to these startups to basically mentor them, to give them feedback on what their products are, how they could actually be used, and also do introductions into the right parts of Turner. And the whole idea is to kind of accelerate and educate the entrepreneurs and their companies and their technologies into actually being useful products that actually can be used to create new stories. So that's what we try to do.
And do you think Silicon Valley is a good place to do this?
I think Silicon Valley is a great place to find technologists. And then we think we can bring in some of the media stuff in. So I think it's a combination. We're trying to cross the beams, and we're hoping we'll blow up the Stay Puft Marshmallow Man. So.
Now let's talk a little bit about the tools. Aaron Coughlin did a lot of those experiments, Wilderness Downtown. I don't know if you guys know this. It's a great experiment. So everybody, when he did this with HTML5, everybody thought HTML5 was like the new tool for interactive experiences online. What do you think, Michael?
So you mentioned flight patterns, and that was done in a creative tool called Processing, created by Casey Reese and Ben Fry, as sort of a teaching tool and also like a creative coding platform. And for the longest time, Aaron and I both have been working with Processing to do data visualization. Unfortunately, back in the day, we didn't have all these new fancy things in the web, at least as far as like web browsers go. All of that stuff is constrained, all the cool stuff is constrained to galleries, or you have to download something and send it out to people, and there's a real barrier of entry. Now with like sort of the new fancy stuff that we have on the web, you can just go to a browser and just go to a URL and go there and see something new and fresh. Part of what we do at Google is to basically evangelize these technologies like open source web tech, and basically find new interesting ways to sort of spearhead that technology, get people looking at it and go, oh wow, we never knew you could do that with this. So Wilderness Downtown is basically part of that initiative to like basically make a cool narrative, work with a director, start with a cool narrative, see what we can do with it. We're going to work with video, we're going to work with interaction, we're going to work with user-submitted content, and then just sort of bind that all together into some interesting package and experience to sort of deliver to somebody instantaneously to everybody, basically. That's the exciting part of it, is that the fact that we can do what we've always been doing, but now all of a sudden, like millions and millions of people can see it as soon as we hit the launch button and fix all the bugs and stuff first.
And it's not just technologies or tools, right? It's also like new practices like crowdsourcing. And you guys did at the Google Creative Lab a lot of experiments with crowdsourced storytelling. Like participation is a big thing for storytelling.
Yeah, there's always a big risk in that because it lands in the community of people who want to troll you, and then all of a sudden you have like 1 million penises on your website. So then you have to come up with very thorough moderation, or you can just let them do whatever you want. Like recently we've done a project called the Exquisite Forest, exquisiteforest.com.
Exquisiteforest.com.
So it allows, it comes from the idea of the exquisite corpse, which is an old tradition of someone writing a story and then passing the story along to somebody else and having them continue the story. But then instead of writing the stories, we let people draw animations. It's a tall ask to ask anonymous people on the internet to make an animation for us. Because I learned how to do hand-drawn animation back in college, and that was hard. Asking anybody randomly on the internet to do that for us is a tall ask. But that's something worthwhile doing, and it's actually it's a very rewarding same thing to see a string, a chain, a whole movie, but made by 20 different people. It's really, really cool.
And it's not necessarily active participation. Jeff, when we were talking at first, you were telling me that's what's interesting with data visualization is that every first person who sees a data visualization is kind of like the first person to see what they see, right? So kind of all those entry points you can have to the same story.
Well, I think that's right, and I think in mass communication that can be a problem sometimes if people see something different, it becomes very subjective. But I think what I was talking about is the excitement that if you feel like you're navigating a vast data set and the user interface is powerful enough to let you do that, you might have the sense that even though you're in a major media site that millions of people look at every month, that you might be the first person to see this particular pattern, this particular state. I was thinking about the New York Times when they visualized the census, the American Community Survey, which was a 5-year estimate of population distribution. I think it came out in mid-December of 2010, and because they'd already built the thing using sample data, when they pushed it out, it was just a couple hours after they'd had it, and the resolution was extraordinary. You could go down to practically the block level, and you could see little pins that represented 50 Asian people, 50 Hispanics, 50 white people, and some of them were actually in the middle of San Francisco Bay, which I think had to do with the way they were scattered. It's algorithmic, But when you can drill down to that level and you realize that this is just such a vast thing, you probably are the first person to notice some of these things, and I think that's exciting, and that's how life should be. We should be able to notice things and share them with other people, the idea that a single, interactive graphic could provide that simulacrum of that kind of feeling of discovery, I think is great.
David, what do you think are going to be big trends, and I mean, what Social Samba does, character interaction on Facebook, really? Like, when I was a kid, I would have loved to be able to interact with, Lord of the Rings characters.
Yeah, they have a huge amount of, it's fan fiction, but it's just a kind of more choose your own adventure. It's kind of the next step. Like I said earlier, it's like, what's next? I have no idea, but I have some inklings of ideas, I guess. I think, social is obviously permeating everything. I think more, sorry to express it, it's called UGC, but more user-generated, more collaborative creation, I think is definitely happening. The tools are now becoming where that's actually possible and viable. So I think all that's going to be changing a little bit. And I think distribution is changing dramatically. The way things are distributed. Things are now going to be accessible to everyone much faster and much easier. It's hard to say, what I always say when I was at Apple was like, asking people to do video things is asking people to do a lot of work. Because it's still really, you can record something audio, you can do it relatively quickly and ship something out, you can edit it, that's work. But to do video requires such a huge amount of effort, but the tools are slowly becoming smarter, where they can actually do some things for you. They automatically cut some things like that. I think as that progresses, more people can do more interesting video. I think that's a definite direction.
All right, we're almost running out of time, and we are running out of time. Aaron Coughlin said something, and I'm not in love with him, but he is, a major reference in this field. He's really interesting. So he said, in his TED Talk, that the interface was the new storytelling medium. Kind of what, David, you were talking about in your presentation. So what are the characteristics of the interface, and what's possible with it that wasn't possible before? Something a lot of people talk about is, narratives used to be linear and now they're not linear anymore. And Jeff, you like talking about sequencing too?
Oh, well, I guess we were talking about how certainly there's a great attraction to nonlinear narratives. You can go in a lot more different directions. In that same sense, what I was talking about exploring a database visually, you can find something new. But I think what I tend to think about is that there is some level of sequencing at every level of media. Just to form a word, you've got a sequence of letters, and so nonlinear doesn't necessarily mean a completely fluid flow, but sort of nuggets of information. And I think if you give different people ways to access that, I think there can be useful. But I think it can be helpful. It's almost, I don't know, what do you guys think?
I used to always think, one of the last things I did before I left Apple was I was running Final Cut. I used to thought I was funny, this whole nonlinear editing. It's like, it's not nonlinear, everything's linear. That's kind of silly. I think the thing that's interesting, though, is the idea of branching, the idea of different derivatives, where that person can actually have an interaction with something and have something else come out. I remember back, I can date myself, back in the early 70s, I was in 1972, I think, it was in Spokane, there's an World Expo. You went to this thing, you sat in a big giant theater, and had this little panel, and it would show part of a movie, and get to a certain movie, and everybody voted about what path it would go down. And you go down a different path based upon that. Obviously, it was a limited thing, but that was happening back in 1972. All that now is becoming much more commonplace and actually part of how you interact with the story.
I've never read a good Chooser's Own Adventure book. You haven't? No. Every time I die, I just go back. It sucks.
Again, it comes back to, I think, the core thing is the story itself has to be good, right?
Yeah.
If the content's, excuse my French, crap, then whatever you do with it's going to be not great, right? It has to have something amazing. I think some people do think, so to me, what was his name? Infinite Jest. Perfect example of completely non-linear storytelling. In fact, you can go down to a footnote, you can go to a 40-page footnote in an extremely small print and have an entirely different story, and then come back to the main story and do that. And you can make your own choice of how you interact and consume that literature. That's huge. And that's because they had amazing content. If you have the same thing in a visual sense, in a multimedia, I think that to me is really interesting. But again, the content was amazing, and that's what matters.
Well, I think, as we, Google had a project about living stories. The idea was to help news organizations create a sort of a Wikipedia-style homepage for a particular news event. And so I think that we see, in a sense, my frame of reference is news, so I'm going to just go with it. But I think as we start to learn things that we may not learn things as that we didn't know before in the order that they happen, but rather they start to bubble up. And one of the things about data visualization, I think, is that, again, we're talking about transmedia more than just data viz, but I think the idea that so much of our data analysis work is retrospective. We're looking at stuff that happened yesterday or a week ago, or some of the work I've done like 200 years ago. It's much more interesting when you think about like the possibility that we're going to start getting updates of information in a much closer to live way. And the question is, well, how do you build story forms that can actually accommodate a major shift in the overall picture? If a lot of stories that we write now are basically looking at that graphic and then writing something about it and talking about why it is that way or what happened. What happens if you don't have time to do that? And I think it's tremendously interesting and exciting. And so what we're seeing is some people are trying to break up stories into what they call sort of atomic elements. I think David Cohen and Ben Hu from Icahn Has Cheeseburger. They have this startup called Circa, and what they want to do is they want to break articles up into very small units so that can be instantly tailored to the reader, so that if you haven't read anything about this story, you'll get a sort of a more basic story. But if your browser history shows that you know a lot about this topic, they'll give you a lot more information. And one other thing I'll say, did anybody watch the HBO show Newsroom?
Oh, yes.
Aaron Sorkin. I only watched the pilot, but I was really shocked at like how much they knew about the explosion in the Deepwater Horizon, and how they basically blew away all the rest of the competition because they had all this information. And it really seemed like 20/20 hindsight to me. The idea that you could build this incredible narrative, and they already knew it was Halliburton's fault because the seals weren't done in the concrete. And this was all like hours after it happened. And so think about all those puzzle pieces of a story that come together very slowly over time, and we finally have a complete picture, and how much work it is, and how a good narrative will come together that way.
Do we have any questions in the audience? All right, and let's, Jeff, I know you have to leave us soon, but. Sure. Okay, we'll start here.
So I think my question is about the first slide that we saw about content being king and technology being queen. I actually think they're more linked than that, probably like a good king-queen marriage would be. And actually that I think that what David threw out about the idea that content is sort of timeless and there's good content that lasts through the ages, I'd actually take issue with that. I actually think that technology and the way that we absorb media now actually affects what is good and what is great. And sure, we can lean on character and plot, and those things probably won't go away, but they're going to change, and aesthetics are going to evolve. And that's really what my question is, if the panelists want to comment on how they see new platforms, new modes of storytelling, and just the bombardment of media that consumers are in right now, how that is changing the aesthetics of storytelling, either for the good or for the bad.
So I'm torn on this, actually, because I see, the mass media and what we produce, right? Some of it's very long and lengthy and amazing. Some of the things that go on HBO, these amazing long arcs and go for long lasting. And the other things are like, reality television, which is, storytelling in a certain form. But some people love that. So I think, again, I also, so to me, storytelling only changed when I have two young children, and I see them, watch, cartoons and things like that, very quick, short things. But yeah, I see my daughter, who's 9, who will spend hours reading, and she's just totally involved. So I think I'm torn. I think it's good. I think it's both. I think there was. When we were back in the 18th, 19th century, there were people who were only involved in the now and the current, and they didn't really read, they just kind of just lived and did their thing. And there's other people who spent time reading and taking their time through life, and it's just different. I think just part of the human condition. People like different things, and I think, my hope is that we won't just all become, reality television junkies and watch nothing else. That might be sad. But I don't think it's going to happen. I have faith in us as a population.
I feel like I hate the word consumer, but I feel like everyone young and old should play Mass Effect. It's a video game. I spent about a good 3 hours rescuing my character's virtual girlfriend from dying. And the game takes place there's 3 series in the game. And the game state is persistent, so your story traverses through all 3 games. It took like over like the period of 6 years or something. The very last game, she dies again, and I tried to save her. And that was like the most heart-wrenching, gut-wrenching like narrative that I have experienced since the last like, I don't know how many years I've like watched television or read books, but like, wow, that really hit me, and I feel that it's missed out on, it's like, oh, video games, like, okay, you shoot people. But no, like, there's good stuff there.
It's sort of a choose your own adventure.
I guess something that occurs to me is that the APIs that bind us, the YouTube embeds, the Twitter streams, Instagram, so much of our storytelling, our personal expression is going on using these sort of off-the-shelf or mashups of these off-the-shelf technologies that are very much a snapshot of the time we live in right now. And I wonder how we're going to ensure that these things, to the extent that we want them to, like, I don't know, iPhoto galleries, anybody? That they're going to be with us in the future when these can form memories and they can form a record of the time. I mean, I certainly don't think anyone's going to have a hard time finding a record of our civilization, making all sorts of stuff. But I think when we talk about the idea of a creative coder, for example, it says something about the tool set that we have right now. That we're sort of we're we are in a golden age, I think, in many ways, but we're still very far from where people will have equal access to the tools of creation right now. The idea that you have to code things to make them is maybe where we were with other things that we now take for granted that we can do with a single button click or something like that. And I think it's good when people understand the tools that they're the underlying. I think a lot of truly interactive stuff requires something akin to coding, whether it's actually writing lines of code or using blocks of connected things. But I think that's where is this going? Like these new code libraries like D3 that has created incredibly beautiful, very smooth vector animations and facilitated a lot of data visualization, or Popcorn and how it's binding together different objects on a web page over time. I think those are very exciting, but is it going to stay like that, where we're all just like JavaScript is the future and we're just sort of using these little libraries and there's more and more of them? It does seem like there's an economy of scale there, things are really growing. But is there going to be some kind of superstructure above and beyond that? I mean, maybe it's
the future. It's a wonderful tool, but I have to take point in saying that I feel like computer programming is a form of literacy. That the fact that you can use a program is great, that you can write, that you can experience something, but also being able to read and write, right, in the digital world is super important. I feel like programming should not just be for coders or for people like myself or anybody who would get Google. I feel like filmmakers, artists, painters all benefit from being able to write and speak directly to a machine and then have it produce something and enhance sort of your ability. It's like using a pen. It's like not learning a pen. You can use this speech dictating thing, but learning to be able to write is super important.
Well, I mean, I'm with you on that, but at the same time, I hear people saying, that not everybody should or can be a programmer. And I wonder, in 20 years, if we'll be like, remember when everybody thought they needed to learn to code? I mean, maybe that's, I'm not trying to antagonize you. No, I'm trying to learn.
I just don't think it'll be called coding. It'll be, I'm creating something and it does things for me. There may be code underlying it, but you don't have to actually think in that way. Yeah. I look back and think in the early a long time ago, I was doing punch cards. I'm rarely that old. And I remember going and having to turning my punch cards, then I get a printout, and things are just different, and things will be different, and the progress is faster. The great thing is, the last 50, 60 years, it's accelerating, but it's also still we have this opportunity to live through that. I just think it's going to be amazing. I'm looking forward to it.
I mean, something we need to stress is that, I mean, at least from my point of view, all those new cool tools and technologies we've been talking about, for me, are not necessarily gonna, just erase what we already have, right? And that's also what Transmedia is about. Back a couple of years ago, we used to think that, that television was gonna completely ruin radio, and then the web, we thought that it would ruin television. But now, Transmedia is about using really all the single platforms that are out there for what they can bring. And so if a book is the right medium to tell a story, you keep the book, and then you also add Facebook if it's, also meaningful. So, I mean, what do you guys think?
To me, it's all about entertainment and/or enjoyment, or having a story. Right, and how you experience it. You experience it in lots of different ways. I think what's amazing is that even old media companies, if I'm representing that, and are understanding that finally, and are actually embracing multimedia, right? Other forms of media, other formats, Facebook's. They're thinking, how do we do? People are going to go and do different things with their life other than sit in front of a tube, right? And so, how do you be part of that? How do you maintain that? And yet, still have the ability to create amazing long story arcs. So they're trying to figure all that out, and I think we're still at the very, very, very beginning of that.
For sure. And also, it's not necessarily about entertainment, it's also about education. A lot of people use Transmedia for educational purposes and to enhance the experience you can have in a museum. So it's not necessarily about making people, dumb because they watch TV shows all the time. So.
Well, I just think we don't want to lose sight of the fact that the technology platforms that exist, is just even just YouTube, have made it possible for people with something interesting or good to get it out there and have it bubble up and take over the world. And I think that's just extraordinarily, amazing.
Yeah, maybe. We have 2 last questions.
Okay. Hey, let's. I'm trying to figure out how I can make this into a question. I just sort of give a quick statement. So, it seems to me that a lot of the stuff you've been saying about there is that stories are there's a line between linear sort of the traditional I'm telling a story and you're listening, and the audience being the world at large participating in that somehow. And possibly, David, you said at the beginning of your talk that nothing's changed because there's still stories, but perhaps something that's very, very, very fundamentally different from what has happened with that. I'm telling the story and I've made it up exactly like this, and you'll now sit and listen. Is all of these different forms of how the audience is, interacting with that, from choose your own endings to taking snippets out of other people's, news stories and tweeting them and all that kind of thing. That didn't quite come out as a question, but I wonder if you might have some reaction to that.
So I think story. Somebody creates some aspect of the story. That every story oftentimes is derivative of something else. So I think we're all living through stories, right? That's how you actually live. Right? You tell your story, you tell your kids things, and they go off and tell their friends, and that's just life to me. So this is, and the way an old school media company does is it has a certain way of telling certain kinds of stories. It won't tell all stories that way because there's lots of other ways of telling stories. But I think it's just, to me, the interesting thing in all this is the fact that, and I actually love this, I don't know what the way it's going to be. I'm happy to be alive and living through it, to experience it, and be part of it. That's fun.
We had a last question.
Thanks. I just had a question about whether you think the tools themselves are going to make us better storytellers. And I think, just to put that in context, when we look at music, the $1 million album is now a $5,000 laptop and a home studio. Do we have better music? Yes, maybe, but we also have a lot more mediocre music. We've democratized production and distribution. So I guess what I'm really asking is, do you think that the exponential improvement in the power of the tools we're creating to tell stories can actually help make us better storytellers, not just the production and distribution of them?
I think one thing that's occurred to me over the years is how hard it is to make a video story from a video camera. That there's a whole vocabulary of shots and certain elements that you need to assemble a production. And I think this is true in many different genres of communication. And I think, and I think these things are starting to come around. Having an app, let's say, that is built into your camera and tells you that you need a wide shot, you need cutaways, you need close-ups, and sort of you almost hit a button and you know that you're recording that thing in that moment, so that at the very least you have the minimum elements you need to assemble a story. So it's not going to give you a great story, but it's going to give you something that's possible to make. And hopefully, as you become less distracted by the sort of the mechanics of telling a story, you start to devote, that gets off-put to some other part of your brain that you don't really have to pay attention to. And then you get to start to really listen to the people you're interviewing, or really, be present in the scene where you are. And I think that's probably true in a lot of different things. And I don't know, isn't there that app that helps you write screenplays? I suppose it's more like industrialized.
In Hollywood?
But
Training wheels.
I suppose if you wanted to put it that way, training wheels. Yeah, I think this could be really helpful. Just like pianos that have the keys that lit up. Is that Rockstar?
Yeah, no, I was going to say, at least it's really challenging. As a radio producer and host, it's really challenging for me to see like all those tools out there. When you look at social samba, I'm like, maybe I could somehow make my stories. It forces you to look at your stories from a different perspective. And that, I don't know if that makes me a better storyteller, but at least I think it's really challenging. And that's a good step, because I'm from France, and you would not believe how, we're not there yet in France. So at least having all those tools and those platforms and those examples make people, in those traditional industries think, in a very, take a different approach to their stories. And at least I think if it doesn't make us better storytellers, at least it makes us maybe more intelligent somehow,
I think we're still at the very beginning. The best tools will disappear. You won't even realize they're tools. Those are the best ones. And we're not even nowhere near that yet. So.
Great. All right. Well, I wanted to really thank our speakers. Thanks for coming. And also thank SwissNext again for welcoming us.
All right, thank you everybody. And I just want to let everybody know that in just 1 second we're going to have some announcements here, and then there'll be some more food and wine, and I hope that you'll stay and chat with our panelists. I did want to say actually one thing about this. This is a great panel, and we're going to be carrying on with the discussion about stories and storytelling and gaming at next month's meetup on October the 29th. We'll have folks from Zynga, Ubisoft, EA, and others who are looking at story and transmedia in the games and how that actually influences the overarching theme of games. I actually own a game company, and when we talk about game development, it's mechanics, aesthetics, and design. So fully 2/3 of that are about story. And so one other thing, just to kind of on David's point, before if there's any other announcements that we want to make, we talk about the UI and the tools being invisible. And when you think about it, there are tools that we take advantage of every day. Pages in books, when we turn them, originally books were scrolls. You'd have to roll it out and then walk down the back to read it, right? And page numbers, this is a UI example that we don't even consider, but it's such an incredible tool when you want to remember what page you're on. So we'll see these tools evolve to the point where we won't even notice them anymore, but they will be so incredibly useful for us, both as consumers of the technology, but also as creators of the technology. To be able to create things like chapters and page numbers and those types of things are where we're at with this now. So I want to thank our panelists again. Give them another round of applause. Thank you.
say that Transmedia SF, we organized a Transmedia Jam. Some of you attended. So a hackathon, create-a-thon dedicated to creating, interactive storytelling, stories and experiments. And we wanted to announce tonight for you that we're organizing a startup weekend, Transmedia. So if you guys are familiar with Startup Weekend, it's a 3-day hackathon. The goal is to create a startup in 1 weekend, and we're going to organize the first startup weekend dedicated to transmedia storytelling. So we're excited. We hope you're excited too. And if you're interested in all this, you should definitely come out, and we'll be creating cool interactive experiments and experiences and stories together for a whole weekend with great mentors and great judges. So yeah, we hope to see you there. Great.
January 18th, 2013.
So October 29th for the next Transmedia meetup, January 18th, the weekend of the 18th for the Transmedia Startup Weekend. And now, is there anybody from the community? I know there's a few 60-second announcements. Lisa.
Hi, my name is Lisa Zimmerman, and you are the perfect crowd for an event I want to invite you to. October 27th, it's going to be a day-long design jam competition for a project called Blue Trail. And Blue Trail is where we're bringing together artists, designers, techies, and ocean advocates for a trail of interactive installations along the San Francisco waterfront next September during the America's Cup Finals.